The idea of a mid-engine Corvette was put into everybody's mind, yes, by Zora Duntov. It wasn't just the bean counters. They didn't really care. What's important to them is making money or not making money, and we all know from the bankruptcy they know how to not make money as well as sometimes make money. I think the real kibosh was Chevrolet sales and marketing. You know, they had gone through a traumatic start for the Corvette, and when it finally took off and became successful, starting really with the 1956 Corvette with its C8 engine, they just didn't want to change the formula. You know, it worked, let's not screw it up.
It's got its rabid fans and it's got its haters, but the Chevrolet Corvette is the longest running production car in history. And that was the voice of Dave McLellan. In 1975, McLellan succeeded Zora Duntov to become the second ever chief engineer for the Chevrolet Corvette. He took over at a difficult time for the sports car. Performance had been on the downslide. There were a lot of people within GM who actually wanted to shelve the Corvette. But Dave McLellan had other plans. His impact on the Corvette was massive, and he was the man behind the creation of the legendary fourth generation of the car, the C4. Have you ever had a car that you just couldn't get out of your head? For me, it was the C4 back when I saw it when I was 16 years old. It was a thrill to speak to the man who created that car, a car that still gets looks and compliments more than 3 decades later. We talked about Dave's time at GM, his thoughts about electric cars, his take on the new mid-engine C8 Corvette, and much more. This is my conversation with Dave McLellan. So, Dave McLellan, thank you very much for making the time to speak with me today. Have to divulge my bias right out of the gate. I'm one of those guys who you describe in your book who remembers the first day that he saw a Corvette and you're kind of never the same again. How many times have you heard that story throughout your career?
Many times, and I don't consider that a bias at all. It's just a piece of reality. And that's one of the things about sports cars, not just Corvettes, but a whole range of fascinating, interesting cars that lead you emotionally to some great new place. They really hook you in, and you're stuck with them for a lifetime.
So the car I saw, it was in, I think, 1984 or 85. It was one of the first versions of the C4. And you were instrumental in the development of that car. You were Corvette's chief engineer from 1975 to 1992, and were one of the fathers of specifically that model or that body of car. To me, that remains, and I know it's been much debated among car enthusiasts, but to me, that remains one of the most beautiful cars I've ever seen. I own 2 of them now, which is becoming a bit of a problem for those around me. And so I've got an 84 and
but not for you.
Not for me, no. I think I need a bigger garage. So I've got an 84 and a 96, so I've got kind of the C4 bookends. But to me, this is a car that every time I look at it, it looks like it's moving even when it's sitting still, and it still gets looks. But just to me, one of the most beautiful cars ever. So just want to say thank you for your work on that. It must have been something to work on.
It was, and thank you for that comment. Jerry Palmer and his team at GM Styling will also thank you, because he put a huge amount of his personal effort into that car, and it really goes back to the this is a little bit of history. It goes back to the 4-rotor car that Jerry was involved with. 84, 74, about a decade and a half earlier, and they had the 4-rotor car, which was later renamed as a conventional car, because it originally had the rotary engine, 4-rotor rotary engine, and then they replaced that engine with a V8 when they could no longer get parts for the rotary. But they had that car in the studio, and many of the elements of that car found their way into the C4, although it didn't have the pointed front end and rear end and the peaked windshield. Those were details that Jerry didn't want to carry forward.
So they had a huge unveiling of the C8 not too long ago. First of all, were you on hand for that? Were you at the event?
I wasn't at the event. I was at the National Corvette Restorers Society event in Greenville, South Carolina. But we put the feed on the big screens in the room after the final dinner and the celebration of all the winners at the NCRS event. I saw the event.
So what did you think of it? What when you saw the car? Now, a mid-engine Corvette, that's big news to a lot of people, and it's catching a lot of headlines. But this is nothing new for you and your team. And my understanding is that when Zora left the company, that was one of the last things he said to you, is that you guys have to do the mid-engine Corvette, and that it was tried many times, and it was sort of the bean counters that put the kibosh on it. When you saw the car on the screen in the flesh that had been realized, what were your thoughts?
Well, let me back up through some of your comments first, and then I'll give you my thoughts. The idea of a mid-engine Corvette was put into everybody's mind, yes, by Zora Duntov. It wasn't just the bean counters; they didn't really care. They're what's important to them is making money or not making money, and we all know from the bankruptcy they know how to not make money as well as sometimes make money. I think the real kibosh was Chevrolet sales and marketing. That there were a couple of things going on there. They had gone through a traumatic start for the Corvette, and when it finally took off and became successful, starting really with the 1956 Corvette with its V8 engine. They just didn't want to change the formula. It worked. Let's not screw it up. And also the mid-engine cars that were produced in the late 60s through the early 70s as Corvette prototypes or concept cars. Marketing looked at them and they were not excited. So it's fairly complicated as to why we didn't do it, and it really goes back, I think, more importantly to Chevrolet than to the financial guys. We all like to blame the financial guys for everything, but the reveal, I was frustrated with it personally. I didn't need to hear from some vice president of GM. I didn't need to hear from the stylist or Mark Royce. They're all important people, but they didn't tell me anything. And it wasn't until we got to Taj Juncture that we started to learn something about the car. The car is all over the internet. So except for the problem of there's misinformation out there as well as good information, and I think that will start to clarify itself now that Chevrolet and GM are talking about the car. But if it had been me, what I would have done is start with a lap of the Nürburgring with the production car, and Chevrolet has and Taj have done numerous laps of the Nürburgring on video that you can find on YouTube with the C6 and C7s. And the C8 has been captured on YouTube running the Nürburgring. So I'm sure those videos are available. And then I would follow that with the night testing at Sebring of the C8R race car, Pratt Miller race car, and that would first beg the question: is this new C8 Corvette a race car, or is it a road car? And it's kind of which came first, the chicken or the egg. But they were really designed together, and I think that's an incredibly powerful message. That when you get in one of these cars, you're getting in a car that has not just a racing heritage, but it was the two cars were really designed in collaboration because there's a very close link between the Corvette engineering team and Pratt Miller and its engineering team. So that's the way I would start it, and then spend the rest of the time diving down into all the subsystems of the car that made that kind of performance possible.
So overall, was it a miss for you, or what do you think of the car itself? Forget the sort of pomp and circumstance for now.
I think it'll be a great car. My only long-term worry is that the Tesla sports car is going to take the oxygen out of the room, so to speak, with its performance. But it's going to be very expensive, and I suspect that variations of the C8 Corvette will come close to being able to get the performance levels that Elon Musk is claiming for the Tesla sports car.
Have you, I'm curious because, you've been a car guy since you were a young boy, and we're talking about, carburetors and V8s and, internal combustion cars. What do you think of the new electric cars? Have you driven one? Are you familiar with them? And what are your thoughts as we kind of, society seems to be merging into that new area?
Well, the first comment is a tongue-in-cheek comment, and that is, you want to drive a coal-powered car? There's good information and there's misinformation about the electric cars. They have some benefits. They have some shortfalls. The power grid is going to be their shortfall. When you look at the amount of energy that is consumed yearly in automobiles, and even if you can improve the efficiency of that by some significant amount, that's still a number that is up there with the power grid itself. So you'd have to make a huge investment in increasing the power available through the electric system. And then the question is, what do you do with all that gasoline and diesel fuel in transport, and the kerosene that's used by airplanes is all part of that mix as well. And right now it's a fairly balanced mix of components that come out of a barrel of crude oil. And you can't you're not going to throw away the gasoline component of that. Yes, you can refine it into something else, but that's fairly expensive. So I just don't see it. I don't see gasoline going away. Also, there's huge efficiency gains being developed in gasoline powered cars, and we're going to see that on the road here fairly shortly. And there's literally a merge between what's a gasoline car and what's a diesel car. That you're able with direct injection and some of the other technologies that are being developed, you're going to see gasoline cars that behave more like diesel cars, and diesel cars that behave like gasoline cars. The whole idea of octane and cetane as being requirements is going to go away with these new systems that are being developed.
From an engineering standpoint, what are your thoughts of the cars? Like, here's a guy, Elon Musk, that has never been in the automotive industry, decides he wants to get into it, and designs cars that, by some reports, consumer reports, let's say, are the safest, fastest, most efficient cars ever made. And, anyone who's driven one, I haven't, but people have said that when you hit the accelerator, it's kind of insane what happens. Like, it doesn't feel natural. From an engineering standpoint, what do you think of these machines?
Well, first off, Elon Musk is he's a brilliant guy and a brilliant entrepreneur as well. He's working in several fields, so you can kind of see his skill set at work there. He's hired some really good engineers to design the cars. You don't design, one person doesn't design a car. It's designed by a team, and it appears that he's picked a very capable, intelligent, savvy team to design these cars. And there's a YouTube video on his sports car introduction that one can go look at and see what he has to say about that particular market. So I've not driven a Tesla. I've driven some other electric cars and hybrid cars. They're interesting, and they have they present their opportunities. Where that's all going to lead, it's hard to tell. New technologies like the lithium-ion batteries are on I would say, a fast growth track in terms of their performance. At the same time, there's work going on the old technology, which I just talked about, that will dramatically change its performance. So where is this all going to end up? That's a good question. At this point, I wouldn't want to bet anymore. A few years ago, I might have been willing to bet, but there's just too much good stuff going on. And are there winners and losers? There's probably winners and winners.
So one of the interesting aspects of, when a company's developing a new car and getting ready to launch it, there's a lot of speculation, and everyone's trying to get images and leaks, and I have a photo or a video of it. And so we saw for many months with the C8, it had that sort of covering, that camouflage kind of jacket on or whatever it was. So you could see the basic shape of the car, but you couldn't see what it actually looked like. That's nothing new, because in the book you describe, when you guys were testing cars on the proving grounds, you'd have guys from like Car and Driver with these long lenses hiding off in the bushes somewhere, and that you guys would actually ugly up the cars a little bit. Like, you'd stick extra things on them and make them look a little wonky so that if anyone got a shot of it, it wouldn't be legitimate. Is that right? Yeah,
we had guys that got excited about doing that. Some of the guys working at the proving grounds. It doesn't do much. Frankly, it doesn't do much good to camouflage the car the way they did, because a good designer can extract the details of shape, and the programs available today, the software programs for design, will allow you to put the car back together again and put a shiny surface on it with all the reflections that are going to be there, and you almost can't tell it from the real thing.
Yeah, they came pretty close, a lot of them. One of the fascinating things I found out reading also is that John DeLorean was working in GM or in Chevrolet. He was the GM there in like 1970, and he was a big fan of the mid-engine Corvette as well, and that he ends up going off and spinning off and creating his own car company. The DeLorean wasn't that dissimilar. Like, it sort of looked a little sort of Corvette-ish, and he had that engine in the back, and obviously had his own issues and sort of ran out of money and had some other scandals and things. But people said that he saw he saw that as a missed opportunity that Corvette should have done the mid-engine, and he went and tried to do it himself and had some other issues along the way, I guess. A lot of people say not even close, like in terms of the quality of the car. Like they said, it was not a great car, though.
Well, he had a lot of problems trying to do that. That's a story in and of itself.
Right.
Don was the general manager of Chevrolet through the early to mid 70s, and yes, he commissioned a variant of the mid-engine design that Duntov had started. The original mid-engine car that Chevrolet built in the late 60s was a steel-bodied car, and I have no idea why they did it with a steel body, but they did. And DeLorean's idea was to do that same structure design and body skin design in aluminum. And one of the guys that worked for me was the project manager on that car, and it was from head to toe, top to bottom, it was made of aluminum. And we saved it, and it's one of the historic properties that represents the Corvette as a mid-engine car. The mid-engine car from that era was a transverse engine with an old hydromatic transmission and final drive kind of wrapped around the engine. So it was a 3-speed automatic at that time. We had designed a manual transmission for it, but it was never built. And the reason for doing the transverse was primarily because that would allow a shaft to go forward through the middle of the car to a front differential, and you'd have all-wheel drive. And I think that's ultimately, one way or another, where the C8 is going to end up as an all-wheel drive car.
A lot of people are surprised to learn that the Corvette is the longest running production car in the world. I believe that's correct, like from the time that it began, but it almost got pulled in 1955. The decision was made to cancel the car because I guess there was some production issues and it wasn't selling particularly well, and they had given some Corvettes to celebrities to try to get the buzz out there, and that they just weren't kind of put together properly, like the panels weren't fitting. And so Chevrolet had made the decision to actually pull the car. But then I believe, if I'm correct, that it was Ford was announcing they were coming out with the Thunderbird, and that's what saved the Corvette because they wanted to have something to compete against it. Is that correct?
I think that's basically correct. Yeah, and I talk about it in the book that the Thunderbird, original 2-passenger Thunderbird, can be given a lot of credit for saving the Corvette at that time. The Thunderbird was canceled 3 years later. Ford did a nameplate switch, putting the name Thunderbird on a humongous car. It's not a sports car. It's not quite a sedan. It's a Thunderbird. It's what it is. And it sold very well. I mean, it sold much better than the 2-passenger. So I'm sure there were people at Ford patting themselves on the back for making that great decision. But if it was only Ford that saved Ford and the Thunderbird that saved the Corvette, when Ford canceled the 2-passenger Thunderbird at the end of the 57 model year, I'm sure that Chevrolet would have been happy to again cancel the Corvette because it was a pain in the neck for them, but they didn't. And the reason they didn't was that by then the Corvette had really changed what it was. And that was a result of the work that Duntov was doing around the V8 engine and performance. So the Corvette by that time was taking on a very different character, different qualities. And you can see that in the 56, 57 Corvettes that though they shared name and a lot of construction details with the earlier cars, they were heading in a new direction. They had wind-up windows, and they had a top that worked much better. There were just a lot of things that got fixed starting with the '56, and by that time they had enough momentum with what Duntov was doing, making it into a performance sports car, that the market was coming to them, and you couldn't deny them anymore. So, yeah, it was. That's where I think Zora Duntov. By then, he really made a difference with the Corvette, and it showed up. People respected it, and away we went.
How closely did you work with him? What was it like? What do you recall from those days? Because he passed away in '96, but this is like sort of seen as a mythic figure in the automotive industry. What was it like working with him, or what do you recall from those days?
The first time I worked on a project for Duntov was back in about 1971, and it was an effort that DeLorean had put together. He wanted to see if we could marry the Corvette and the Camaro together as a platform, and that way better justify the economics or deal with the economics of the Corvette. And they asked me to run that project, which I did. We had a group of designers from Chevy R&D who had designed cars before and knew their craft very well. And we spent several months looking at possible alternatives there. But in the end, the packaging, the architecture of the Corvette and your traditional front engine cars like the Camaro were so different that there was no good way to bring them together. You'd destroy the Corvette if you made it into a Camaro, and you'd basically destroy the Camaro if you tried to make it into a Corvette. So we had a show and tell, explained that to DeLorean, and Duntov was there, and he was very happy. We did this sort of over his dead body. I don't mean dead. I mean that it's one of those situations where he was very against the idea. He knew it wouldn't work, and we had to prove it. And I suspect that had something to do with how I came out a few years later as the Corvette chief engineer. That started in January of 1975.
So the one year that there was a little bit of a blip on the radar was 1983. So the transition from the C3 body, which is, the one with that very long sort of, Tim Burton Batmobile looking hood, and the C4. My understanding is that several dozen of them were made, but for whatever reason, the decision was made to not actually produce or sell the cars that year. So I think all but one of them were destroyed. And that one is at the Corvette Museum right now. But what was the deal in 1983? Was the car just not ready, or someone had to pull the plug on it for that year that it wasn't produced?
It wasn't ready, and it was not an engineering issue. It was a purchasing issue. The normal start of production is in late July, early August of the prior year. And here we were already past that and into October, November, before we had hoods. That was the real long pole in the tent for us. And then with that lateness, Chevrolet made the decision: do we want to build 1983 Corvettes for essentially 9 months? Or, and then at the end of that, have to redo all the paperwork for an 84 and also give the dealers rebates as they usually do, for cars left in inventory. And Chevrolet management said, "Hey, we're not going to do that. We're going to wait until January 2nd of 1983 to put the car into commerce." And we actually started building California cars first, because you can't build all the cars you need for all the markets all at once. So we built California cars first and got those out early in the calendar year 83. And the rule is that you can only have one January 1st in a model year. So starting into commerce January 2nd, we were able to run for, I think it was 17 months with the 84 car. So it was a Chevrolet market decision. Was it good or bad? It was what it was. That's all I can say.
So they destroyed all but one, right? Like they actually put them in a little crushing thing and just decided to eliminate the cars. Well,
yeah, if you put it into commerce, you would have caused yourself a lot of mischief. And we typically do not. Well, typically we do not. Period. We do not sell cars that are experimental build cars. They ultimately go to the crusher. Yes.
It seems like such a waste.
Well, there's no way you can sell them. you have to be able to certify all the parts in the car as meeting whatever safety and emissions, et cetera, requirements there are in order to sell a car to a customer. And the many of the parts in those cars would not be fully certified production parts. Right. You don't sell them.
Yeah. My understanding is it was some of the employees actually kind of hid the car and tucked it away, and that's the one that got saved.
Well, yeah, it ended up out in the weeds, and I think for years nobody knew that it was even there. And somebody found it and brought it in, and yeah, they cleaned it up, and there's a 1983 Corvette.
Beautiful. What do you own any Corvettes now? Or you must have had a bunch over the years. Do you have any now?
Well, yeah, I've owned Corvettes. While you're engineering director of Corvette, you've got access to probably over 100 Corvettes and competitive cars. So owning Corvettes through that period was I would say mostly useless for me, because I had access to test cars, next year's cars, the year after. Yeah, we were developing the future for the Corvette. Today I own a 1995 ZR1, and at this moment it's up in Traverse City with Haggerty, the historic car insurance people. They're doing a showing at their offices of the three different decadal ZR1s.
Wow. What color is your car?
It's a polo green.
Very nice.
And it's modified.
What sort of mods did you do to it?
I sent it over to one of the first-class Corvette rebuilders, Mark Habeck, who's south of Chicago. And Mark did some work on the engine itself. It has headers, aluminum flywheel, 410 axle, a different shifter. It's got modern tires on it. Modern in the sense that the tires of 20 years ago have evolved even further. It's got LED headlights. So yeah, it's caught up with some of the things that we take for granted in modern cars today. It's sitting at about 500 to 520 horsepower.
Wow.
And with the aluminum flywheel, you have to be careful. And that and the 410 axle, you have to be careful in first gear, because you'll light up the tires.
Wow. The 96 that I've got, it's got this weird feature on it. I forget what they call it, but like you can't shift from first to second until you hit 2,000 RPMs. And wasn't that some like government regulation in terms of fuel efficiency or something that was put in?
Yeah, that's a long story. The first way to work around it is not to shift out of first gear at such a low RPM. First gear is good up to 40 mile an hour, 45, maybe 50 mile an hour, depending on what combination you've got.
Okay.
And so, yeah, to shift out like that, you're just being lazy. Sorry.
All right. So I'm getting some driving tips too. That's good. I found it was a funny story in the book that there's actually a Corvette connection to the Fiero. Like the reason the Fiero, everyone remembers the Pontiac Fiero. I think they were all made in red. But the reason that they exist was a proposed version of a mid-engine Corvette that the executives declined to pursue, and that got shunted off and turned into a Fiero. Is that right?
Not exactly. The Fiero was really smaller than what they were showing as a V6 mid-engine Corvette. But that was an era where GM came into the fuel economy issue unprepared, or ill-prepared, I should maybe say. And we did a lot of weird things as a company that in hindsight made no sense. If we had better prepared ourselves for improving fuel economy, we would not have had to downsize some of the luxury cars and make them unattractive to buyers. The Fiero started out as a little four-cylinder economy car. I don't know what to say about it other than it was what it was. They ultimately got into trouble with it. Pontiac did, because the engine in the middle of the car was not easily accessible, and a lot of the people who owned the car didn't check their oil. And it had, that little four-cylinder engine had a very small oil capacity. So if you ran out of oil, you had a serious problem, and they did. They had all kinds of mischief from that, which I won't go into. But and ultimately they just canceled the car, and that's the way it was.
What's your ultimate Corvette? Knowing what you know and having driven all of them and having had access to all of them, what's your ultimate Corvette?
I think it's really next year's car. That's the way I answered that question while I was engineering director, because I was right in the middle of defining the car probably 3-4 years out, and then by the time you got to drive them as prototypes a year out, you had a good sense of what you were doing and what the car was capable of. So from a performance standpoint, from a styling standpoint, quality of build, reliability, all those things we worked on together. And so yes, next year's car was a special place. We also spent a lot of time, as you know from the book, developing the car for the racetrack. And that turned out to be a very useful experience. And it developed the car very rapidly from a reliability standpoint, because all the systems that make the car capable on the racetrack are also the systems that the customer relies on for their primary driving experience. The car became very quickly very, very reliable because you don't do 24-hour endurance races with a car that has flaws.
I heard that Porsche couldn't beat the Corvette. I think it was like around 1985 or so. They couldn't beat it on the racetrack, and the company actually purchased one to take it apart to figure out, why can't we beat this car?
That's a story that I've heard as well, yes.
That's kind of a compliment.
Yeah, it's a backhanded compliment. We raced in SCCA showroom stock A class for 3 years. Primarily, Porsche was the only real competitor, and they ultimately showed up with the Turbo 944 as a race car, and it was a very capable car, and very competitive against the Corvettes of that era. There was a race at Portland, Oregon, and it was one of the endurance races. I think it was a 6-hour, but I'm not sure of that. It doesn't matter. But one of the Porsche turbos was in front, and none of the Corvettes could get by it because there was such a close performance capability between them. And midway through the race, it started to rain, and the Porsche Turbo spun off the racetrack. The Corvette that was following it saw what was going on and was able to use his anti-lock brakes to bring the car down enough that he could get through the turn, and he went on to win the race. So that's how close it got toward the end of that series. But overall, in those many 6, 12, and 24-hour races, the one of the Corvettes won each of those races against the Porsches.
It's a great run. I heard that when you were a young boy, that you actually rebuilt the family car. Is that correct?
Well, we screwed around with a lot of things like that, yeah. I wouldn't say we rebuilt it, but I learned how to paint cars and do interior work from that period. It's nothing I would brag about.
What age did you know that you wanted to be, that you wanted to work in automobiles for a career?
Boy, that's a hard question to answer because it goes back into the fog of history. I would say a pretty early age. Yeah, I was a mechanical engineer taking model trains apart, bicycles apart. And when you first do that as a kid, you've got parts left over. The new departure bicycle brake, for example, with all those little discs in there, and you're taking it apart in the backyard, and you can't get all the discs back in because you've got little bits of sand, gravel, and dirt that are expanding each of the discs. So yeah, you either got to clean it and put it back together, or go run it for a while until you get all the dirt out of the discs, and then put the rest of it back together. So yeah, you
learning on the job,
all of that. Yes, learning on the job. So
back to the C8. Looking at the car, do you think they missed anything? Do you think there's, looking at it and seeing the specs, was there anything that you would have kind of done differently? Like, there's no manual transmission, for example. Do you think that's a mistake?
I don't think it's a mistake, no. You can use one transmission as both your automatic and we'll call it a manual. It's an 8-speed dual clutch transmission, and you can drive it as a paddle shift manual,
right? Or
you can put it in automatic mode and just drive it like an automatic.
All right.
It's faster. When you look at the videos of the production car running on the Nürburgring, you can hear the shifts, and they're very abrupt, but they're very smooth. The car doesn't bobble. The car is in the middle of a turn, and you can hear the shift take place, and it's just an abrupt shift. But they've done such a good job of managing the momentary power to the engine that the car doesn't slow down or speed up. It doesn't You're not stressing the tires in the middle of a turn
Right.
anymore. From the fore and aft traction issues, it just operates smoothly. And you see that with Formula One cars with their paddle shift systems. They're able to do a very smooth job of shifting wherever they need to shift, middle of a turn. Didn't used to be able to do that. We had to do a lot of fancy footwork in order to do shifting that didn't upset the balance of the car. So it's a good system, and it's where the future is, and I guess we just have to get used to it.
There's a quote in your book. It's, how did such a strong Corvette loyalty develop? Understanding this is crucial to a successful Corvette future. Thus, it's necessary for any new Corvette to maintain a conservative tie to its past. Obviously, this is written, a long time ago, but do you think that the new version of the car kind of maintains that tie to the past? Like, does it look enough like a Corvette for people to kind of carry that torch?
I think that's the one issue that we're going to have to, we're going to have to see what happens. Will traditional Corvette enthusiasts move on to this new Corvette, which doesn't really look like Corvettes of old? When I saw the C7 and knowing that there was a C8 coming behind it, one of the thoughts I had was the styling of the C7 is really a transition styling to the C8. Did they do this, the design of the C8 before they did the C7? I don't know that for sure, but you can see a lot of that in the C7 as a transition to the C8. So that may in fact have smoothed the way somewhat for the C8, and we'll have traditionalists who won't be interested in a mid-engine Corvette, and they can buy C generations of whatever they want and live in their past space. They're certainly welcome to do that. It was a decision on Chevrolet's part not to continue the C7 or to do a front mid-engine and a rear mid-engine car at the same time. That was probably an economic choice as much as anything else. And we won't know for several years if they do a good job with the C8 as to whether that's important or not. Because for a while I'm sure there'll be a feeding frenzy for the few cars that GM can build for people, even running the plant full throttle.
This is the first version of a Corvette where the steering wheel, they have a version of it where the steering wheel is on the right-hand side. Do you think that they are, with this structure and style and body of the car, going after the European market? Or are they going after the Ferrari and Lamborghini customers? Do you think that's a strategy, or am I reading too much into it?
The Ferraris and the Lamborghinis, they have a very focused. Well, they have an audience that just has to do their cars, and will Chevrolet at a completely different price point intrude into that market? We'll have to see. If you look at the price of a lot of the Ferraris, you could own 5 or 10 Corvettes for that price, and have one for every day of the week that's a different color. So we'll see what people do. I can't. That's a piece that I don't know how to predict very well.
And that brings up my next question, which is about the price. Because when I saw the car and then I saw the price, I thought, how do they do this? Like, it seems like a very affordable sports car. Like, it seems like an affordable supercar to me. And it sort of makes you realize how overpriced or how much margin there is built into like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, which has essentially the same kind of components. How much of an important factor is getting that price right for this car?
Interesting. That's the final question, isn't it? Where's it going to price? And I would say in some ways they've underpriced it. At the same time, I don't think you'll be able to buy the car for that price for quite a while, between the option content and dealers putting their price premium on the car. It's going to be a more expensive car for a time. That will ultimately settle out, and you'll be able to buy the car for what I would consider to be a reasonable price. Now, that's still well below some of the supercars. Will it affect supercar pricing? Probably not. I mean, a Porsche 918 at almost $1 million. That's a totally unique market way up there.
Now, I don't know if you're familiar with or if you watch a lot of YouTube, but I've seen recently there's a trend where there's these young kids. They look like they're late teens, early 20s. They'll purchase like a salvaged Lamborghini or something that was smashed. I'm thinking of two guys specifically. There was this white Lamborghini that I think a woman rented, and she drove it out of a parking lot and smashed it into a pole immediately. And so the car's written off. These guys buy it for next to nothing. And then they start doing videos of themselves fixing it. And they seem to know kind of what they're doing. And they're taking these parts and they chronicle the whole thing. And their videos are getting millions of views now. First of all, are you familiar with these? Have you seen any of this stuff online? And then the second thing is, like, do you kind of wish that this was around when you were young and you could have kind of had your own show? Because these guys are celebrities now.
No, I have no interest in being that kind of a celebrity. They're doing something interesting, though. The powertrains in those cars are what makes them so expensive to repair, or impossible to repair at a reasonable price. At some point, then you can buy one that you have to rebuild. So what they're doing is putting Chevrolet crate motors in them. So they're getting the various LS motors from Chevrolet. They may be doing from some other makes as well, but I see mostly Chevrolets going into Porsche Carreras, the 911 Carreras. It's a squeeze to be able to do that, but yeah, that's a very I wouldn't call it common, but you can buy a Lamborghini or a Porsche that's been totaled and remanufacture it with U.S. component base to some large degree, and have yourself a very powerful car. The aluminum Corvette motors are pretty lightweight, so you're not really changing the weight distribution of the car that much, if at all. So yeah, other than you have to do an awful lot of adapting. It's not easy to put a liquid-cooled engine in an air-cooled car. So you'd be better off to start with a late Porsche or one of the liquid-cooled Lamborghinis or Ferraris, for that matter. It's a bit sacrilege, but yeah, you can do it. And there are guys doing it, and God bless them.
So 2 more quick questions. I know you've got to run. The first is, this is going to be my only chance to talk to the guy who designed the car that I love. And so I'm wondering, is there anything like, is there kind of like a little secret, or is there something in that car that I wouldn't know about? Or like, is there some kind of like, they call them Easter eggs now, where there's like programmers will put a little thing into a car, but, is there sort of some insider knowledge about the C4 that I and other fans or owners of it would be interested in knowing from the guy who kind of built it from the inside?
Yeah, we didn't try to hide much. The rear tub on the convertible has a Chevrolet theme embossed into it. What was it? The baseball, apple pie and Chevrolet, or hot dogs, apple pie and Chevrolet. That's embossed somewhere underneath if you dug into it far enough. But no, we don't do a lot of that. I do run into the occasional software issue, even on my car, that somebody stuck in there. But the guys that we work with in the aftermarket are good programmers as well. So we've cleaned that stuff out.
And just before we go, when you reflect on your time at the company and working on the Corvette and having such an integral role in kind of shaping it and creating it, how do you think about that period? And what are a couple of the stories or kind of feelings that stand out from that part of your career?
Well, I would say, number one, that we had a forward focus, and the styling and performance of the car, overall performance, being able to run a complex road racetrack like the Nürburgring was a very primary goal, and racing the car on the track through 85, 6, and 7, and then we had the Corvette Challenge after that. That really fast forwarded the car in terms of its performance and reliability, and then the culmination of that was the 24-hour run with the ZR1 in the spring of 1990. One of the things that it started with a development team and some of the outside press guys and Tommy Morrison. They wanted to go for a world record, 24 hour world record. How fast can you go for that length of time? And they set about to do it. Chevrolet couldn't believe that they wanted to do it, and that they thought they could be successful. Chevrolet thought it was going to be a failure. They didn't want any part of it. The guys went and did it anyways with one of Tommy Morrison's cars, and they set a world record that lasted for well over a decade, 175.885 miles per hour, average speed for 24 hours, continuous. Yes. And it was really, when you look at it, it was a severe test of the drivers. The car had been well developed in 24-hour races that were competitive, and the powertrain had been developed on the dynamometer. The LT5 4-cam engine had been well developed and run for as many as 500 hours. Successfully. So we're running for 24 hours, piece of cake. And at the end of that 24 hours, they went on to do 30 hours. And at the end of that, they actually ran the car at full throttle, because they weren't running at full throttle well, they had to run about 180 mile an hour in order to average 175. Because of the pit stops for driver changes and fuel and tires. So at the end of that period, they took the stop out from under the accelerator pedal and went full throttle for a couple of laps, and the car was at that point capable of well over 190 mile an hour. So, yeah, the record is now up in that range from a car that Volkswagen built with one of their, I think it was a W12 engine, and they did it at Nardo in Italy, which is a safer track than the track that we used down in Texas, a Firestone track at Fort Stockton. So they've moved the record higher, but done it with not with a production car, but with a very purpose-built singular car, which is fine. The rules for the world record don't require that it be a production car, but we did it with a production 01.
So we're going to put a link for people to buy your book if they're interested, Corvette from the Inside, the 50-year development history as told by Dave McLellan. It's been an absolute treat to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Take care, Dave.
You bet. Thank you.
A very big thanks to Dave McLellan for taking the time to speak with me, and thank you, as always, to you for listening. If you're interested in getting Dave's book, it's called Corvette from the Inside, the 50-year development history, and it's available on Amazon or through Dave's website, CorvetteChief.com. If you haven't subscribed to the show yet, please do. And if you could just take 2 seconds and leave a quick review of the show and a rating on Apple Podcasts, that would be really appreciated. It'll help other people find the show in the sea of 700,000 other podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.